Hello, and welcome to this latest webinar from the She Network, where today we will be talking about a topic which is affecting many of our followers and one that can cause anxiety, heartache, and anger for those experiencing it. That topic is redundancy. According to the Office for Students, nearly three-quarters of universities face a deficit next year, with predictions of over 10,000 job losses this academic year. Some are being offered voluntary redundancy, some are facing compulsory redundancy, and some will have the fear of redundancy and job uncertainty looming over them, whilst ongoing restructures are becoming an expected part of life working in higher education. Today, our guests will be sharing their lived experiences of redundancy, and our aim is to offer support, hope, and practical advice on how to navigate times of uncertainty and take control of our own narrative. Our skills are valuable, we are valuable, and we all deserve to be confident in ourselves and optimistic about our futures. I'm delighted to be joined by Simone Davies, co-founder of the She Network, and
Hello.
hello Simone, and two experienced and passionate HE professionals. I'll pass over to them now to share why they wanted to take part in this conversation, starting with Deepthi.
Thank you. Hello, everyone, and thank you to the She Network for asking me to join them today. My name is Deepthi, as you would have gathered, and up till Wednesday, 30th of July, I was the head of brand at the University of Edinburgh. I worked in various roles, marketing and brand roles in the same department for 25 years. Before that, I was a creative copywriter and strategic planner for advertising agencies such as JWT in Sri Lanka and in Singapore. I worked on both local and global brands like Simple, Davidoff, Visa, but that is many, many moons ago. I'm here today because I wish I had a webinar like this when I was trying to make a life-changing decision, which is to take up voluntary severance. I certainly would have felt less lonely, um, probably more supported, and perhaps the decision-making process would have been less stressful personally for me to have been supported by amazing women and seeing uh, like-minded thinking would have really helped. That's me.
Thank you, Deepthi. And over to Christina.
Hello everyone. It is absolute pleasure to be here, and thank you, Marcella and Simone, for inviting me and to have the opportunity to meet Deepthi, who I don't think our paths have ever crossed. As you can see, I'm Christina Hughes. I've had a long career working in universities. I'm a professor of women and gender. I was at Warwick and ended up as Pro Vice Chancellor, at Sheffield Hallam as Provost, and finally at the University of Kent as interim DVC for education, which is where I met Simone, which was fabulous, actually. Um, at the end of all of that, I took a little while out to decide what I was going to do with the rest of my life, and I set up Women's Space. And Women's Space is designed to support women who work in universities. And it's very simple, support them to flourish in whatever ways that might mean for them. I've done restructures. I've also been the subject of restructures, but actually many, many years ago, and not on the scale that the sector is facing at the moment. So I bring all that experience. And recently I ran a webinar series around restructuring in HE, and that was seriously useful for me understanding more about what's going on, but also the kinds of advice and guidance that there is out there for people.
Thank you, Christina, and thank you to both of you so much for agreeing to take part in this conversation. Let's start with what people are experiencing at universities right now, how they are feeling, and how they are being treated. Deepthi, how did working life change for you throughout the redundancy process? And did it have an impact on your emotional well-being?
Oh, we definitely did. I think looking back, the signs were already there. my budget would had been cut down to 1%, and many of my responsibilities were gradually being reassigned. There was a lot of vague talk in the university about restructuring, financial pressures, change, nothing really concrete. So the rumor mill was heavy, playing, pretty strongly in the background, and the communication from leadership was quite limited. I mean, both from my department and above that. So speculation and rumors filled the gap, and which made the whole working environment, in, I think, increasingly tense and unclear, which, doesn't really help. Eventually, the announcement came, in my situation that voluntary severance would be offered. And interestingly, it also coincided with me turning 60, and I had always wanted to stop working when I was 60. So for me, I felt the universe was speaking to me, and saying, "Okay, time for a change, new chapter, move on, get going." But I know that was my decision, but I don't think I was fully prepared for how emotionally complex the whole process was going to be. I suppose I expected, I naively thought, people would say, "Are you sure? Should you be going? We can't do without you." When I submitted my application, instead it was instantly accepted. There was no hesitation, no real conversation. Um, and I think that lack of acknowledgement stung more than I anticipated, more than I realized I would feel that. It reinforced a sense of being undervalued, like I was already written off. I think I think also it was a case of feeling really quite sad because the communication was so poor. There was a real sense of detachment, and when finally the news of, here are all the 350 people that have been accepted for voluntary severance, and that was well, made known and everything. I must say that colleagues didn't quite know how to react. Some were very awkward, and some didn't even say anything. It felt like something awful had happened. Like someone had died or something, and it was really isolating, and it really felt like a line had been drawn. It was a real emotional roller coaster for me. And I think I wanted to share all of this not because I want to dwell on the negative, on the fact that that's how I felt and it was not very positive. It was a very positive decision for me, but I hadn't expected or anticipated all the sort of negative um, downside to it. And I think that is very, very important to be honest about the emotional realities of whether you take up voluntary severance or redundancy, because it's not just a contractual or career shift. It's deeply personal. And if you're feeling, you know, grief, sadness, anger, all of these are very valid. And I think for me, what I would say to anyone who's listening is work through them. It's very much part of the process. God, I rambled on. Sorry.
No, that's really interesting. And I think you've touched on something. And gosh, I was made the first time I was made redundant was over 20 years ago. But actually, at the time, I think it was more talked about, that it was very much aligned to grief, and I think somehow that seems to have been forgotten a bit. But the grief of losing something, but also the bit where, if you've lost someone close, people also don't always know how to react to you when you've had a close bereavement. So the two things, sort of people's reactions and how you're feeling, I think, and it's a sense of loss, isn't it? So even though you made that your decision, you have still lost quite a large part of your life. We work
Absolutely.
a lot of hours a day.
And you poured in so much of your life into
Yeah.
that role, into that institution. And to feel, I think that acknowledgement piece really stuck with me then, that you didn't have that moment of just thanks and gratitude, and you've done so much. And,
Yeah,
that's a really big part of moving on from a role as well
yeah.
and closing the door.
Yeah, absolutely, Marcella. I think, definitely there was an appreciation and there was lots of loveliness after. But I think at that time when you give in that application and when you make that decision, that to me is, I think, if senior leadership out there are going to be watching this, that is when you need to say the nice things, not after, because it's absolutely crucial at that point, because you've made a big decision, and you've, like you said, Marcella, I put 25 years into this university, and suddenly to say, oh, sayonara, was hard. And then being nice after, it was lovely, but it was a bit too late, is my opinion.
And 25 years is more than half your grown-up life. That's a when you look at it like that, it's a
Yeah,
long time, isn't it? Half your
yeah,
life.
yeah, absolutely. And it was also because I had moved up to Edinburgh, so and I changed careers and made Edinburgh my home. So the university and working was very much part of my grown-up identity, if you know what I mean. So yeah, it was a bit of a loss. But like I said, it's part of the process. You have to go through it.
Christina, do you think universities are doing enough to offer that kind of emotional support and create psychologically safe places for people that are navigating what for many are very distressing times?
I just want to say, Deepthi, a big thank you because from my experience, certainly of the last few months of coaching people and talking to people in the sector, you've spoken the truth for so many, many people in terms of your experience. And actually, I know that that will make a difference for people who are listening, because one of the most powerful things about this kind of thing is actually people then don't feel they're alone, or they're going mad, yes, or they're not coping, or whatever it is, so I really do thank you for that. I mean, my honest answer is no. I'm sure there are pockets of colleagues who are supporting each other and are able to, manage what exactly how Deepthi eloquently, gave us, which was confusion, speculation. It leads to incivility, greater incivility. It can create toxic environments, because underneath all of this is a deep fear. Everybody's fearful. Yes, fearful about their futures, fearful about their finances, fearful about what might become, all of that. And of course, fear is not the basis for any psychologically safe environment. And so it does absolutely concern me that there are so many people going through these experiences, often actually for the first time, because this is the first time the higher education sector has gone through mass redundancy. I imagine, I'm from Birmingham. The car industry when I was growing up was, a big thing. It was common to go through these processes. Maybe you get inured to it. But yes, for many people, it's the first time. It is confusing. It creates a lot of anxiety and a huge amount of stress, and that does not make great working conditions at all. And there's just one thing I would, when you're in that situation, I would say, and that is to ask the question. It's so simple. Ask the question in any meeting: how are we all feeling? And many years ago when I was doing my PhD, I did some research on uh, feminist psychotherapy. And I went to this feminist psychotherapy center to kind of, start getting to understand their work and so on, and went to a meeting. And the first question, I was shocked. I'd never been in a meeting where this question was also was, how are we feeling? How do we feel about that decision? And it's so simple just to do that. And to create the environment where people can actually start, as Deepthi so wonderfully said, start exploring actually what they're experiencing and what's happening to them.
And having a voice as well at a time it might feel like your entire future has been decided behind closed doors. Actually having a space to talk about how you're feeling, because I'd imagine there's probably a big sense of rejection throughout the redundancy process.
That there's certainly underlying like fear is, one of the things that underlies fear is not being loved enough. So they accepted your VR. They could have not accepted it, and it is a rejection. It feels absolutely in those kinds of ways that it is. You're not a member of the tribe anymore. And I think, that and how people responded was very much like you're not part of the tribe.
There's sort of a myriad of different ways in which people be feeling depending on what's happening to them, isn't there? So if you are in a position where you make that decision, but actually deeply listening to you, you made that decision based on one thing which was personal to you, but also you knew what was happening around you. If you didn't do it, it probably, your view would have been it would be done to you anyway. So it's not quite being, it's taking back control, but you're being forced to make that decision. I think there's the constant sort of in the background when people are working in a lot of universities at the moment, knowing that it might be them next, but how do you navigate that? And actually sometimes once you do know what's happening, then you can deal with the change. It's that fear of the unknown and not being able to do it. So once you can take, as you've done, take control and put things in place, but that uncertainty is quite difficult. And I think there's also something for the people who are left behind as well. So it's not quite survivor's guilt, but there is something around that. Why not me? And do people who are left behind still feel very valued? I'm not sure they do. Some of them would have asked to go and been told no, but that might not have been because they are fundamental to the organisation. That could just be based on a financial decision. So even if they've been told no, you can't go, I'm not sure that they get that warm fuzzy feeling that they're still part of something and still very valued. So it's really complicated.
It is, and I think it's also being, for me anyway, it was also being a woman, and I was always and a mother and a wife, and I was always putting other people first. So I was always thinking, how is this big change going to impact other people, and how's that going to how am I going to deal with all that? My boys not dealing with the fact that they've got mum's bank account anymore because they'll now have to go to dad, who never gives anything. But it's those sort of things. But I think it's just one of those things where you don't really, and I keep saying things, but you don't really appreciate the emotional implications more than the practical implications. I think you work through the practical side of it. You think, okay, I'm going to have this kind of money, I'm going to have this kind of thing, I'm going to start working, I'm going to do this, blah blah blah. But for me, the toll was very emotional. Was I hadn't even contemplated how much that would affect me.
And something that's struck me, having seen a lot of universities go through restructures and redundancies, is that the people that are making the decisions about who is either being made redundant or can get voluntary severance aren't connected to that role and don't understand that person, their impact and what they do day to day. So it's a deeply emotional, um, has a deep emotional effect on the individual, yet the person making the decision has no connection and therefore there's no dialogue. That kind of always perplexes me that, these massive decisions can be made without really understanding what's happening on the ground.
I think it's very difficult. I think, universities are very cash strapped, that they have to make some decisions that are quite unpalatable. I think some of that is people just see the decisions, they probably don't see the angst that people have making those decisions as well. And I think, Deepthi, you touched on it before, it's about the communications, and if the communications could be better, because it's a lot of feelings, isn't it? That's how people are feeling. But actually, we only know how we're feeling, really. We're not experiencing how others are feeling. I'm not sure there's an easy solution, but it is very tricky, I think, to navigate for both those people who are having to make those hard decisions, who do know the impact of those. And I've been on both sides of that. I've had to make those decisions and I've had decisions made to me. But
Yeah,
trying to navigate that is quite complicated as well.
agree. I also think that it's a question of strategic and structural um, gap here, because I think the process of VR or redundancy, goes through a strict HR process and financial process, and there are steps to follow, but there doesn't seem to be in tandem with that sort of the internal comms or the support side of it working alongside it to make sure that the comms is working, or that there is internal messaging happening, that people are being thought about. It's quite cut and dry, which I totally understand. But if you're part of a community, and the whole conversation, coming from a brand background, is about the sense of belonging and the values and all that kind of stuff. Where was that piece? you know, that piece was in to me was severely missing. Um,
I think it would be good, actually, when you're listening to this, if you could let us know in the chat, how, if it's been handled well where you are, and what made you think that you were treated fairly and well, and your emotional well-being was taken into account. But we'd also like to hear when it hasn't been done well and what you think could have been done better. And I think we really need to bring that whole conversation forward.
I think that leads really nicely onto our next section of this conversation, which is at a time where it may feel like we have a lack of control of our future and our own narrative. How can we take ownership and stay confident in our own abilities? And I know, Christina, this is something you do within your role, and I'd love to know how you advise the women within your network to lead their own story at times of change.
I think you have to go back to Simon Sinek's why, the roots of your purpose. But actually, I don't think it's easy. That's so easy to say, but actually, it's not. And when you get to the end of it, you think, I knew that already. It's a weird thing, but it's not easy to do. It's not easy to access, actually. In my experience, after I'd left Kent, and I loved Kent, by the way, I really did love Kent. But after I left Kent and I was kind of on the treadmill of the next job, and then something inside was saying, I'm not sure I really want to do this anymore. Um, on reflection, I was probably burnt out. And one of the things I'd say to anybody is take some time to do some work, some looking after yourself. Because for me, it took a good 12 months to work through what I wanted to do, how I wanted to be, and also to let go. We talked about bereavement and grief earlier on. You're having to let go of who you were in the past, and that is in and of itself a process. And I use the metaphor of the habit, So if you're going to be, if you entered a convent, you start as a novitiate and you don't put the habit on. Yes, you just embody, you work and live in this community to see if it's going to be for you. And that novitiate stage, I would say I was in for quite a long time, trying to work out, I'll try this on or I'll try that on. And then eventually the penny drops, and you kind of take your next step, your very kind of fragile, fearful step into your next life. And that is about roots. So I've always done research on women and gender. All of my practice, I hope, was informed by equity and fairness. Whether that was with, WP students or, with women, whatever it might have been, or a thread. And it's finding that thread in you that's always been there, and then going through that process of really reinvention. So purpose, strengths, how you turn up in the world, how you want to be. And one of the things I tend to send people to is Tara Moore's inner mentor visualization, which is based on future selving. Because actually, we have to imagine, we have to use our imagination and imagine ourselves as other than we were. Yes. And and that visualization, it 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 worked for me. It works for others. It helps you actually begin to think in Stephen Covey's terms. Begin with the end in mind. Begin with the end in mind. Where do I want to be in 5, 10, 15 years' time? Who do I want to be? How do I want to be? And once you've worked that out, you then can work your pathways back to it.
That's brilliant advice,
I know.
Christina. I'm banking that 100% for the future, and I love I love the analogy as well, and how you talked us through that. I know, Deepthi, you mentioned on our pre-call that you had a strategy yourself to create headspace and clarity. If you're able to talk through that for us.
Sure. I mean, thank you, Christina. I am now like trying to think, who do I want to be in the future? But that's brilliant. Thank you. Thank you for that. Um, yeah, Marcella, I definitely when I feel I can't control or feel out of control, I take time out. I consciously um, uh, physically and emotionally remove myself from that situation, and for me that is spending time in my allotment. That's how I do it. I paint the shed pink. I watch herbs grow. I just sit there. Strangely enough, there's a gentleman in the next plot who when it's warm weather takes his shirt off and sings opera. I mean, there's a whole different ball game out there in the allotment, but it just slightly helps. I think, Christina, you touched on a point about, putting yourself fast, and that when I take time out, it, I find I consciously have to put myself on that list because I always put everybody else on that list, but I don't go onto that list. So I'm very conscious of how I get back onto that list and what do I need to do to be that big bold underline me, 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 me. and not forget that, and make sure that that is thing. And I think in the process of my taking time out, when I was thinking about voluntary severance and stuff, I also made a list of non-negotiables. What is it that I will not compromise on going forward, or what I've compromised on in my past, but I will not in my future self. So just for example, I had initially thought that I wouldn't touch my pension for a few years, that I would, but when I was painting my shed, I just thought, I'm absolutely going to resent being dependent on my husband. That's just not going to happen. So I am happily in OAP as well now. So I'm loving that. Because my current joiner gave me a discount, so I'm really pleased for being an OAP. I think I would say, beg your pardon, I would say is be kind to yourself. Give yourself permission to focus on you. It's not being selfish. It is essential. Because if you take ownership, you then know what really matters to you.
And I just think also we should rephrase OAPs to YAPs, young age pensioners.
I know, I can't get over it, but free bus pass, OAP, quite a lot to take on.
We're not old, are we? That's the thing. And I think age is actually, you've touched on something, that everything that's happening to people at different ages, it will affect you differently at different parts of your life cycle,
Absolutely.
your life journey, that there are different challenges as an older woman than there are other challenges as a younger woman. And I think somewhere in the middle, whereby you've got the experience and the connections, probably places you in quite a good position. But there is age discrimination as you get older, and I think that that's something it will be a challenge to many of our listeners. For me, I think the best advice is to speak to as many people as possible. So we've had people contact us through the She Network, and actually I think just sometimes having that conversation with somebody who's been through it, somebody can reassure you that what you're feeling is normal. Somebody that can perhaps help you with some practical advice as well. And I mean, we're not the only network. I'm not sure, Christina, obviously we've got your network, and there will be other places out there that people can access, because if you're not getting that outplacement support from your organisation, I think there is something about having to go out and make those connections. And sometimes that's quite hard.
I think that leads really nicely into the final part of our conversation. And this has really shone through, Christina and Deepthi, what you've just shared with us, that redundancy is not the end. And for many, for so many, it leads to better opportunities and more fulfilling roles and lives. So for anyone listening that are in this position, where can people go to receive advice, network, and stay motivated to kind of move through this next chapter? I know, Christina, you have a toolkit that you work with women in your network on.
So certainly with Women's Space, if you don't subscribe to the newsletter, please do, www.women-space.co.uk. We do lots of free webinars, we do lots of blogs, we send out stuff all the time, so there are networks there. I just give a shout out also to Kristin Neff, who is a US academic who has a huge amount of stuff on self-compassion. So there's a lot of free downloads there. And if you're in that kind of just emerging shock, angry, upset, anxious, whatever, it's a really great place to go to. And one of the things I always tell everybody, and they think I'm mad, but give yourself a hug. It does do something up here. In the same way anybody else would hug you, But actually, every so often, give yourself a hug. Just self-compassion. As Deepthi said, be kind to yourself. The other person actually who did do a webinar for me in June is Karen Hurd Laureate, Laureote. You'll find her on LinkedIn. And she's set up for, if you're thinking of consultancy, she's set up a network for consultants in HE. And if you're thinking that route, then definitely check out the work that she's doing. There is a lot out there. Also, if you're looking for jobs in HE, then the job market is now growing again. One of the webinars I ran, we had Emma from Jobs AC on there, and she says it dipped just before Christmas, but it's picking up because actually, as restructures happen, new job roles get generated. But I've noticed, and I've been forwarding a lot on LinkedIn lately, there are actually more jobs coming through. So it feels doom and gloom, but actually there are, there are jobs out there if you're looking. Okay.
And how important would you say LinkedIn is as a place to communicate and to talk about your current situation? And I'm saying that as someone, it's taken me most of my career to get to a point where I'm regularly posting and sometimes showboating, and utilizing it as a channel. I know that you really do, Christina. So any advice, very welcome.
So I was never a LinkedIn person. I used to be on Twitter, and then for all the reasons that everybody understands. And I do play with Instagram because I like those little doggy pictures and stuff like that. But LinkedIn, absolutely, right? Absolutely, absolutely. Because headhunters are on there and they will check your profile. And if it doesn't look great or you've not posted, it sends a message to them. It might not be the message that is the truth, but it sends a message to them. And people are, nobody likes someone who goes, oh, look at me, aren't I great? So the person I always send everybody to look at who does this so fantastically is a wonderful friend called Lawrence Young, Lawrence, Lawrence Young. He's just retired. He's a highly cited cancer specialist, virus cancer specialist. He's the nicest bloke you could ever meet. You would never know he is this kind of kingpin of cancer viruses, whatever he does. And all he posts about is medical stuff in an accessible form that is so useful. And if you can think, what is your thing, your purpose, and you post about that and not about you, then you become a go-to and you support other people and you post their stuff as well. That way you can raise your visibility without feeling it's all about, aren't I great, and all that horrible stuff. No, none of us like. You have to do it every so often. You have to do it, right? But generally, become a go-to.
It's an investment in you, isn't it? So I did work with someone on my CV when I was looking for new roles. And I was able to afford to do that. I appreciate that not everyone can, but actually, if you looked at the cost of that, then I probably spend that on other things that are shoes. But actually, even if you can't afford do it in terms of paying someone, but invest in the time in your CV, and there's a lot of free resources out there that you can access. And I would say don't be afraid of ChatGPT. Don't use it entirely, but sometimes it's very hard, and I think marketing people in particular find it very hard to talk about themselves. And actually using ChatGPT to craft some of what you're trying to say about yourselves, you might be surprised. You often come off sounding extremely wonderful. So I'd say use in moderation, because you can sometimes tell, and edit it and fine tune it. But it is time, and I think you have to take that time investing it in yourself, investing in your LinkedIn profile, your CV, all of your cover letters, and investing in time in terms of reaching out to people.
Absolutely. I agree. And I think, I can't remember, I think Christina, you spoke about finding your tribe. And I think it is absolutely important to find your new tribe. I wasn't very much of a LinkedIn fan. I dipped in and dipped out. But I found in the last couple of days, I'm scrolling, there's so many amazing people out there, amazing stories and uh, you know, notes of inspiration. And then you go on, I doom scroll a hell of a lot because I love Instagram as well. But now I'm finding I'm more on LinkedIn, reading up on people and being inspired and feeling, okay, there is hope. There are people out there doing things that you know maybe I could think about or I could do, or getting snippets. And as you said, Simone, it's also being able to crib some brilliant sentences from people's profiles as well.
Why not? There's no such thing as a new idea.
And I think one thing that really stands out to me is that most people care deeply in your network about you, about helping others. And I've reached out to many people over my career. I've messaged them or asked them for a coffee or a meeting to get some advice. And very rarely has someone not got back to me or said no, because people are so giving with their time. So if there is somebody that you look up to or somebody that you think you would like to make a connection or build a network through, reach out to them and just be bold and send them a message. And I think you'll be surprised at how many people get back to you and actually want to help. And that extends to us at the She Network as well. We have an inbox and we're always happy to field any questions or connect people where we can. But we really are all in this together. And I think that's what makes our sector so special, that we care so much about what we do, about each other, about people, about our experiences. Um, and I think that kind of rounds off our conversation really nicely. I have been deeply moved, Deepthi and Christina, today by everything that you've shared. And I think our listeners will be too.
Yeah, I echo that. And thank you as well for your time and your honesty in sharing those stories.
Hopefully, if you've been listening to this, you are feeling solidarity and hope, and that you're not alone, and actually that you've got every right to be excited about what's next, whatever that may be, and that you have the ability to take it with both hands and be in complete control. Um, so, thank you very much to all of our guests, to our listeners. You've been listening to a conversation from the She Network, a network by women for women working within higher education sector. We would love to hear about your experiences. If this is something you're going through, you can message us or comment on one of these posts. And where possible, we can share your experiences too. So thank you very much. We hope that you have a wonderful rest of the day, whatever you are doing, and that you can tune in to a webinar soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for
Thank you.
asking us.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.